welcome to another Burn News and Views. And we're starting on a bit of a more than a bit of a sad note tonight. Government announced just a little while ago that we had another COVID positive related death. And on behalf of the Burn News family, we just want to wish them our condolences and to their friends as well. Tonight we have the Shadow Minister of National Security and Health, Michael Dunkley. Minister or Shadow Minister, what words of advice do you have to the community going through this pandemic and what they're suffering through?
Don, good evening, and let me also start where you started by passing on our condolences to the family and the friends of the person who has passed away, the latest victim of COVID-19, now 24 deaths. Over the past 2 weeks, it's come all too regularly, and I guess it's a stark reality that this pandemic will spare no one. I think we got lulled into a false sense of security after the beginning when we were locked down through March and April and May, and we had a good streak through the summertime. And then in November, we had our second spike, and now we've had a third spike. Reality is hit home that the pandemic is still here with us, and we've let our guard down, and now we're paying the consequences for it. Unfortunately, we're in a more difficult position now than I think we were when we started the pandemic. We're better off because we know more about the challenges that we face, but it seems like a lot of the hard work we've done over the past 12 to 14 months has been frittered away by the actions of some people over the last couple of weeks, and now we pay the price with hospitalizations at a high level. Unfortunately, too many people in the ICU, and we're seeing people pass away because of it. So we've got our challenges to face, but we know that even though there is a dark tunnel in front of us, and that there's only a small ray of light at the end of that tunnel because of what we've done over the past couple of weeks, that there is hope, and that hope is the vaccine. And the vaccine is the best way out of it for myself, for my family, for your family, for our community, and all our friends. And we need to up our campaign to make sure that we get people to understand what the vaccine means to us, so we can get through this difficult situation, because we are not only facing a real test of our health, Don, but we're facing a real test of the future of our island home, which we love, and we have to do better very quickly.
Yeah. Part of the thing, it seems like the whole issue of the vaccine has really divided our community. We have people with very strong opinions on both sides, and I've seen friendships busted up over this. What do you think can bring our people together to help us get through this pandemic?
I think as leaders in the community, we have to have these discussions in a mutually respectful way. And I have to say that, listened into the Premier's national address last night, I was disappointed with the line that he used in referring to my notes. The nature of our discussion in recent months has turned some of us against each other. That certainly, I think, really was a lightning rod for people. It is truly unfortunate that we've become divided by this. Look, when you face a crisis, when we have a pandemic that has been on our doorstep for months, when people's nerves are frayed, when people's livelihoods are tested, when people's health is tested, when family and friends are split up, when our mental health is tested, when we don't have employment, we have to be very careful how we interact and treat each other, because we face the very real possibility of raising that divide, raising that wall amongst ourselves. And I see no reason why that has to be the case. I fully support a vaccine. I've done the research. I've talked to people I respect who have a great deal of knowledge about this. I've come to the position myself. My family's come to that position as well. But I have no disrespect for those people who don't support a vaccine in any way. And in fact, I engage people day in and day out to try to have the conversation, because I think conversation can break down those barriers and break down that division. And that's where we need to go. If there's a better way out of it, I like people to tell us what the better way is. And if you research, or if you go on and listen to people. I came home from work earlier today, and I was listening to a BBC show, and they had an expert in the States talking about the vaccine. It was very convincing, just one after the other, that trotted out. We need to understand the science behind it and how it works and what it will do for us. But at the same time, we need to listen to those who don't support it, respect what they have to say, and try to get them to come along and buy into it. The government has always said that this will not be a mandatory thing, and you have to respect people's ability to do what they have to do. But until we get that community immunity, we're going to continue to struggle with this. And it's a bit different for us as a small community to struggle with it than a big country. When in a big country, you can get away. You can get away from the challenges you face. You can go to some open space and some fresh air and get away from people. But in Bermuda, we have a very high density of population. It's hard to get away. And we're going to be impinged by the lack of community immunity until we actually get to that point. And I think we're falling behind the parameters and the guidelines that the government has set. So May 28th is very optimistic, and I don't believe we'll get there at that point unless we pick it up.
Well, what do you think is probably, according to your own calculations, where do you see us hitting that 70% number?
I think that there's a potential we can get it by the middle to the end of June. Definitely from the past couple of weeks talking to people, I think we've seen the rush to vaccinate has slowed down, and I think that's been seen in other countries as well. There's been some stories about the United States over the past couple of days that they had a goal and they've got up to 3 million vaccines a day, and now they dropped off that. Clearly, if we're allowing walk-ins, that must mean there's some capacity there. So we need to forget about the date, and we need to push to get people vaccinated as quickly as possible, because vaccination do offer protection. They're not an absolute blanket for us against COVID, but they do offer protection much the way a seatbelt does. A seatbelt doesn't mean if you get into an accident, you're not going to have any injuries, but it protects you to a great extent. And that's what we have seen. The science has been correct so far. And we need to talk about it more and get rid of some of the phobias, the fears, and the social media that has no substance behind it. It's creating that division, and it's creating that hesitancy for people to even become engaged in the conversation, and that's more dangerous in the conversation itself.
Well, I know some people that refuse to engage anymore because they're just tired of the other side, whichever side of the divide they're on. They're just like, I'm tired of talking at this point.
Well, we can't get tired of talking because the pandemic's not going anywhere.
Right.
It is around us. It spreads quickly, and we have to pay attention.
Yeah. Further to your point that you were talking about the numbers lagging off, I was reading in the Cayman Compass today, and the governor there said that things had slowed down and was urging people to get it. So it's not like it's an uncommon thing that's happening. Everyone has that initial rush to go get the vaccine, or not everyone, but a majority of people. And then it's the people who may be vaccine hesitant or vaccine resistant, talking to them about why they aren't getting the vaccine and understanding their point of view.
Well, that's true. I mean, you make a really good point about this, but in a community which I have already said is very dense, that it is more important for us to have these protections than other communities, because of the density of our population. The virus can spread much more quickly in a high dense situation than in other countries, and that's one thing that we can't forget in the beautiful island that we live.
Right. You were talking about all the various effects of COVID. It's not just the health effect; it's the financial effect, and on top of that, the mental effect. Can you possibly give us one or two stories of people who are suffering in one of these areas that, without giving any names, of course, that have touched you?
Well, Don, I would suggest that at this point in time that every single Bermudian or resident on the island has very personal stories that impacted them. Whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's a business environment. We all know it. I mean, we could have been in May or June last year, and we've talked about it. And it's secondhand stories, but now it's very real. It's on our doorstep. And I don't want to get into specific of stories, but no one is immune from this right now. And until we actually get on top of it and make sure that we can build the community immunity, these stories are going to come over and over and over and over again. And we're too small a community to let this type of pandemic beat us. We know what we have to do. We've been very successful up until the spike in November, and we managed to get through that. But now this one's come back with a vengeance that no one would have expected to take place. So we know what we have to do. The vaccine has proved to be work. I don't think there's any country in the world who has had concerns about the vaccine. And we also know that if we wear masks and social distance and do those type of things, we're going to be in a much better position. But unfortunately, there's a small measure of people amongst us who will flaunt the rules and regulations, and it's created a real challenge for us right now. And I spend all day, every day, just trying to make sure that in the circle that I go, and it's kind of diminished now because of the restrictions put in place, but between work and home, just talking to people about the importance of creating your bubble, how we do a job differently now with the bubble, how we can protect ourselves, trying to get people vaccinated, talking to people about vaccinations. And I think the progress is slow, but it's happening, and we need more people to do that because the conversations can be difficult, but they are productive.
Yeah. You have a unique portfolio of health and national security, which also covers enforcement of the COVID restrictions. How would you assess what's happened up to this point?
I think that a great many people in Bermuda believe that it's been poor. We've heard a lot of excuses from politicians that the restrictions and the regulations haven't been enforced, and that's unacceptable. I heard the premier a number of times say that he will speak to the governor about this, but I'm sorry, the government of Bermuda funds the Bermuda Police Service, and he who pays the piper can call a tune occasionally from my perspective. And if the premier is concerned about the enforcement, he should call up the commissioner and ask him what's going on. How are we going to do a better job of enforcing the regulations? I just thought that was an excuse. We can't use excuses to get around for the failures of us in enforcing the regulations and the legislation that we have. The members of parliament, we make the rules. Those rules, the laws that we make in the House of Assembly need to be enforced at all times. And if they're not, we need to raise hell about why they're not being enforced. We all have stories about people getting away with stuff, and we all see the social media videos that, in some cases, they're accurate and a reflection of what's going on. That has ruined our country and put us in a more difficult position than we need to be. It's strained our hospitals. It's strained our healthcare workers. It's something that no one expects. It's frustrating people because the vast majority of Bermudians are doing their best to abide by rules and regulations. And to see the flaunting of that, it's just not acceptable for politicians to say, I'll speak to Government House. That's not what governance is about. It's not what leadership is about.
Yeah. I know we've seen a lot of people in court for the curfew breaches, but I think like the people in the community want to see some people who've been there, who've thrown the house parties or the parties at Botanical Gardens, and see them face the piper.
Yeah, but in the middle of a pandemic, why is a government authority renting out a building for a session, whatever it might be called? You would have thought that the policy would say there's no rental of buildings. That's plain and simple. But that's what's frustrating people. And another thing that's frustrating people is that there were a lot of people who have taken the vaccine because the government has urged people. It's the approach we need to take. This is the science. Let's follow the science. Take the vaccine, and we'll be in a better position. But they're taking the vaccine, and they're in the same position as those who don't choose to take the vaccine. So they're frustrated. And they say, well, why did I take it? I'm in the same position I was before. And so, the inability for the government to make these critical decisions and move us forward over the last couple of weeks is starting to really frustrate and aggravate people. And, we in the opposition, we want to be supportive in every way because we're in a national crisis. Not only are we fighting the pandemic, but we're fighting for our lives and the future of us in our livelihoods and our economy. We're a small place out in the middle of the ocean. No one owes us anything. If we don't get our act together, there are not going to be many people help us out. Just the 64,000 Bermudians that will rally to help us out. And some will stand on the sidelines and use social media to complain that we haven't done anything about it. We've got to save ourselves from this, and that means we've got to hold people accountable. And the premier needs to make some tough decisions. He can't please everybody, but we can get through this pandemic together.
Yeah. Well, I know last night he sort of addressed it in a way with the travel restrictions that are going to come into place on June 6th, where if you're not immunized, you're going to have to quarantine. What did you think about that?
Well, I think that's a fair approach to take, but obviously I think there'll be a lot of people who will complain about that. But if we're going to fight this pandemic on our shores, we have to make these tough decisions. And it's one of the things that my colleagues in the OBF have called for. I think my colleague, the Senate leader, Ben Smith, has called for the 14-day quarantine for some time now. So we're pleased to see that that has taken place, and that those who are immunized can have a negative pre-arrival and a negative arrival test, and then they have their day 4, 8, and 14 tests, but they're free to move around. These are the type of things, these are the type of decisions we have to make. But at the same time that we stitch up the borders to the best of our ability, there are a lot of other circumstances that we have to deal with. For example, through this, as we head into the summertime, we'll have more students coming home. Now, I take it that there's probably not as many students as away that we would traditionally find at this time of year, but we'll have more students coming home. And how do we deal with our students in a fair and appropriate way? Is it the best thing to do to put them into quarantine, or do we have to give them the opportunity to at least get vaccinated so they can get back here without staying in quarantine for a long period of time? So, the border control is one issue that has some sticky subjects that have to be dealt with. But I think just as perplexing to people is when we went to the shelter in place, and it was in early April when we had the first 2 weeks, people were asked questions about the regulations were put in place that they really didn't make any sense. They didn't add up. And this latest batch that came in about 8 or 9 days ago is the same way. The government says you can't mix household, but everyone who goes to work is mixing a household.
Mm-hmm.
The government opens up construction, and yes, I think construction can open up safely, but at the same time, they wouldn't support the decision they made to give St. Regis the exemption to have a construction. And when they got pushed back in the community, they had one of two decisions to make. One, we supported the exemption because we believe in the project and we believe they could do it safely. Or two, after listening to the feedback from the community, we decided that it was appropriate to pull the exemption. But lo and behold, what did they do? They just said it was issued in error. I mean, no one believed that. So, that is really the trust that the government had built up before the last election. And to a great extent, they won the election on the handling of the pandemic, has been eroded because of decisions and less than forthright conversations. And here we are now, opening up construction, but the hardware stores have to serve people from the sidewalk. I'm not in construction, but if my boss tells me to go down and get a load of lumber, I'm not having a guy pull it out the store and throw it in the back of my truck until I check it out. But if grocery stores can work, if pharmacies can have people in them, why can't the hardware stores have some of the same type of restrictions to allow our construction firms really to work? Because if they can't get what they need, the work's not going to go on. So you're defeating the purpose. So there's all these little questions about it. The hospitality industry has taken, I don't know how many slams through this period. Restaurants open up and they closed up again, and now we just have takeout, which has to end by 7 so everyone can get home for the curfew. That's not workable. The hospitality industry has been dashed. Taxi drivers are struggling to get any change in the meter. And much of the hospitality industry, such as tour boat operators, which became a conversation with SailGP, are really struggling. And against that context, government didn't expect this third surge to take place, or this third spike, because from what I know, the unemployment benefits still haven't been worked out for people who have been off work for 3 or 4 weeks now. Now, how does that make people feel?
You would have thought, like, from the last time, the system had already been set in place, and you just have to reinstitute it.
Yeah, and the Minister of Finance, who I have great respect for, he's been silent. He's been silent on this issue, and probably because there's no money in the budget for it. Because I think that through this, the budget for 21-22 was only about $15 million for the national pandemic. And so there's no money put aside because government got caught with this latest spike. But we need to get with it, because people who have been off work going on a month now, how do they pay their bills? How do they get food on the table? This is crazy. You've got pharmacies allowed to open, and yes, they should be allowed open. but there's nobody lining up to get prescriptions. They're in pharmacies doing other shopping, getting gift cards or, candies or other supplies that they have. Yet necessities to keep this island ticking are forced to go to restrictions, and government can't even answer people when they apply for exemptions. That's not leadership. That's running for cover in the time when the people most need it. And, I think the PLP can turn this around, but they've got to start talking to people and telling them why they make decisions, why they can't make the decisions, and when people apply for exemptions, stand up for them or tell them why they can't grant it. Don't make excuses about it, because when people drive around now to go to a grocery store, go to a pharmacy, and they drive by and they see other people working, they are pissed off because they want to work. Every person wants to be able to take care of their family, but they can't. They're forced to stay home for week in and week out and can't even get a benefit.
Yeah.
It's not a good situation.
To tie that in with what you were talking about earlier about immunizations, I know the CDC has stated that people who've been fully immunized can be allowed to go into a restaurant with other fully immunized people without their mask and go ahead and have a meal. What do you think about that? Should that be allowed?
But look, I have a lot of respect for the CDC. Obviously, as the body that has knowledge in the situation, I think they've done a pretty reasonable job since the pandemic started. And one thing they have done is when the science has shown them that they need to change the position they have and to come out with new guidelines, they do that. We followed CDC guidelines from the start, but now we seem to be falling behind in those guidelines. And I would have thought that the premier could clearly hang his hat and say that, well, these are the CDC guidelines. We feel they're appropriate. We can do them. Now, he has moved to some extent that way with the changes for May 2nd and June 6th for travel, but he hasn't done it locally yet to free up our economy and get people back out. Look, it is clear that if we look at the pandemic's approach since March of last year, it spurts in the wintertime and in spring. In the summertime, it wanes away, and in fall, it comes back again. And now, as we head into the summertime, and Bermuda, you can be outdoors. You can be safe and outdoors. CDC has also said that the spread outdoors is minimal at best. And so we should take advantage of that, and we should allow people to free up and get out there following proper guidelines and build our mental health and wellness again, because we know what we have to do. We've got to overcome this fear because shut down, not mixing households, that's not how humans live. We've been under it too long. And I'm not saying we have to be rash in any way. There are guidelines we can follow. Isn't it strange, Don? Reflect back and go get all the wordsmiths from all the press conferences and how many times government has patted themselves on the back for doing a good job. And many times they were right. But that patting on the back has stopped now, because even when you take a look at the United States, where everyone was complaining how bad it was in various states, and I'm not going to measure them, the United States is basically opened up. They're in a much better position than us now with travel amongst their states. They've vaccinated over 30% of their population now with 2 doses in a short period of time, and we fall behind. And that is just a sign of leadership dropping the ball in this situation. And the opposition is ready to work with the government, do what we have to do. But the close conversations we had last year have disappeared. That's not good for us.
How would you rate government's response to this third wave then, if you were giving it a mark?
I'm not going to give a mark because in school I thought our teachers graded too hard. But I think that we got caught to some extent. It was very clear in the middle of March that there was a wave coming, and we've seen it here now, and it's been with us going on 6 weeks now, and hopefully that the positive cases are going to continue to trend downwards. We've been in the 20s the past couple of days, and hope we'll stay there. But we got caught, and the restrictions came way too late, and unfortunately, it spread a lot quicker than people thought, because people are out there, as the premier said, doing a pack. Right. And it's hard for Bermudians to police our family and friends. We're too small a community. How many people will contact a politician and say, hey, I need you to know this, but I can't say it myself?
A couple more questions because our 30 minutes is almost up. With last night's speech by the premier, the tone with the non-vaccinated travelers having to go into quarantine and pay for it at a government facility, was that just right? If we're playing Goldilocks here, is that just right, too soft, or didn't go far enough?
Well, I think if you take a look at countries all over the world, everyone's had a variance of that policy. So you can argue it in every way. The reason why I think the premier was forced to to be that stringent is because when people were given the opportunity to quarantine or isolate at home, they weren't doing it, and that's serious. And also, one thing that we need to reflect on is that with the drastic upsurge in positive COVID cases, contact tracers can't keep up. There's so many people that one positive case can have at a close contacts that they're having a hard time keeping up. So, their government's being forced to make decisions to make it easier for them to get on top of the pandemic. And we only have ourselves to blame. We were in a good position before, and some of those have gone out and carried on, and now we're paying the price, all of us. And sadly, people are paying the price with their lives, and it didn't need to be that way.
Right. Now, the last question, and then I'll give you a chance to say you have the last word. Do you think June 6th is too soon for this policy to go into effect? I mean, a lot of people, if you look at it, if you haven't had the vaccine till now, you're probably not going to make that June 6th date.
Well, you're talking about Bermudians on the island and people overseas coming in. Look, I don't think no matter what date you set, there are going to be people complaining about it. But remember that, when you set a date, you always have a challenge that you can beat it or you can fall foul of it. And I think the premier's got to be aggressive in setting timelines and keeping to them. That's the way he's proven to be. Just look at May 28th and the community immunity. People had plenty of opportunity to get vaccinated. We started in January, and a couple of weeks ago, people could sign up, and there's been vacancies to fill the vaccination. I think more people need to talk about it and get people signed up to make it happen. Other countries are doing it. Other countries have policies that are much more lenient, but we've got to protect our community. Sadly, 75% of our community is either obese or have diabetes, and that's a recipe for disaster. So we have to err on the side of caution.
Now, I had a whole list of other questions to ask you, but we've had a good conversation tonight. Is there anything that you want to say before we close out?
Well, let me reflect a bit about what we've already talked about. There are a great many people in Bermuda who are very concerned about where we stand. There are a great many people who find every day to be monotonous because they're stuck in their house. There's not much they can do. They have family and friends around them who are struggling. Children are out of school. Our seniors are in the same position, that they've been stuck in their house for well over a year. Our hospitals are showing signs of strain. Our healthcare workers and essential workers have been in this position for well over a year. That now is the time to suck it up and let's follow the guidelines that are laid down by the government. Let's drop all the conspiracy theories and all that type of stuff. Government is trying its best for the people of Bermuda. We can question their decisions. We can offer some better solutions, but the way forward is to follow the guidelines and to get vaccinated. All the rest of it should be shelved. We are 64,000 Bermudians, and we're only going to get through this together. So forget about conspiracies, and forget about that we know the latest sciences. It's just not going to work any other way. Until we do that, we'll be struggling. And I'm tired of it, as everyone else is tired of it. And I feel sorry for the people who have to work day in and day out just to try to help Bermuda, protect Bermuda, to give testing and to give vaccinations. We can do better than this. We're almost there. It's going to take some tough decisions for us to continue to get there. And we're going to have to realize that these restrictions are for the good of us. Even though I don't agree with all of them, they're done for the good of the community. And you should take your concerns to your government representative, make them listen, and we can work together to get out of this mess.
Okay. Well, appreciate your time tonight. Michael Dunkley, the Shadow Minister of National Security and Health. Appreciate you giving up part of a Monday evening taking you away from your family. So thank you.
No, thank you, Donna, and I wish everybody the best of health. And I'll give one last bit of advice. Drink a big bottle of water, get a good night's sleep, get some exercise tomorrow, and refresh your mind. We'll beat this Bermuda.
Yes. And on behalf of Burn News, we're wishing everyone a very beautiful evening.